Alright, this video is going to be a bit different from what I normally have been doing. I wanted to do this video because as someone that tries to approach understanding scripture from more of an ancient context and trying to keep my dogmas and personal beliefs out of it to understand it, it obviously at times creates areas of cognitive dissonance where your system of belief does not match up with what the scholarship is pointing towards, and that can feel uncomfortable. So I'm completely going at this free. This is not a prepared talk at all. I'm going to use an example, so I'm calling this a case study. It's a case study for myself, something that I experienced. This one was a little difficult for me to overcome, though if you as the listener of this video might not think so. But for me, it was a deep part of what I was taught growing up. And so I really felt it. So I'm going to kind of present that here, my experience, and then kind of how I worked through that and how I applied some of the things that I have learned when dealing with cognitive dissonance, because I have studied this subject. It's interesting to know when it comes to cognitive dissonance, there's actually a lot of scholarly articles from psychiatrists, people who study these things, that point out that people that have cognitive dissonance, number one, it's perfectly normal. And if you don't have cognitive dissonance, you probably don't read very much or talk to very many people. Cognitive dissonance is simply a part of life. It should happen. If it doesn't, then you're not living your life to your fullest, most likely. Maybe you're special, but you'd be a rare case. And if we are to throw out our original belief or take on and adopt the new belief really quickly, just because we can't handle the emotional or mental pressure of that dissonance, that would be a sign of, I don't want to say intellectual maturity, because it's not like you're thinking through it. It's more like an inability to process what you're feeling and to be patient and to realize that more often than not, there's usually information that is out of the picture that you have not learned yet. So in my particular case, so I was grown up in a culture and I was taught that the mark of the beast was something that we would look forward to. It was going to be something that we were going to have to deal with, that it would impact if we are to be able to purchase things or sell things or have a role in the economy. And some different views within my culture kind of developed around that. I think the most prominent being that there'll be some type of a chip implanted in the hand or maybe the forehead that allows like a scanning device for you to be able to purchase things, kind of like how we use with our phones, except for it'll be a required thing and against the law to not do it. So I grew up with this belief, and as I began studying the scriptures through a scholarly lens and trying my best to eliminate my personal dogmas, I came across the concept that 666, the mark of the beast, is actually referring to Emperor Nero. And for me, the evidence was strong enough that it created a very apparent feeling of cognitive dissonance. It opposed everything that I had grown up being taught. So the evidence, a number of things to it, just for people that are interested in things like this. So 666 with is it grammatia, the word that describes how the Greek and Hebrew languages were used, and Latin, how they would ascribe a number to a specific letter of the alphabet. So some in the actual scripture, it says something about like the number is ascribed to a man. I can't remember the exact wording of it at the top of my head. And it also says those that know who I'm speaking of will know. So obviously it gives this impression that has something to do with the person, and also that people that understand the system of what's going on surrounding the time of when the text of Revelations was written, that they would probably understand it. So you take that and you realize that 666 actually is the number code for the name of Nero. And you might think that by itself doesn't quite convince you, but then you get Latin manuscripts, early Latin manuscripts that have 616, which when you write it in Latin, the number comes out to 616 because it drops a certain letter. I'm not sure what it is, but it takes away 50, so it turns into 616. And then to even make it further than that, you have a culture of people, and there's a name for it, I can't remember what it's called at the top of my head, who believe that Emperor Nero actually did not die, and that he was going to come back and take over Rome and start persecuting the saints again and killing them. So when I was presented with all this information, it became, to me, maybe not others, but to me, obvious that this is probably what this is referring to. And so I had to wrestle with that. I had to try and think about how to do that. And I found through my studies of dealing with cognitive dissonance, because I do study these things, I found rather than simply just changing what I believe, let's look at some different views on this, see what other scholars say, see what other theologians say, or see what other people in my own culture say about it. And one of the views that I came across wasn't so much a view that was presented, but something that I noticed, and that was that some people will reinterpret ancient scripture and apply new meaning to it. And we see this in the scriptures. The New Testament, it quotes Jeremiah talking about the one preparing the way of the Lord, something along those lines. I think it's in the book of Matthew. Whoever wrote Matthew, it's hard to believe, for me at least, that the writer was not familiar with the story of Jeremiah and that it actually is referring to Israel. So I started to realize maybe there's this concept of reinterpreting scripture. And then I read this book called The Old Testament with and Without Jesus. And that really made me adopt that view, because really everything that we interpret with Christ in the Old Testament, to me, after reading this book at least, really showed that this is later Christian writers reinterpreting scripture and giving it new meaning. And so that got me really differentiating between exegesis, what the original author meant, and how things are later reinterpreted, and then what that means for me in my time. And this is kind of a complicated subject because it's putting together scholarship, academics, and personal belief. So the exegesis with Revelations talking about the mark of the beast, to me, is talking about Emperor Nero. But there could be room that maybe scripture is reinterpreted for something that we're supposed to be looking out for our day and age. Now, in this specific case, I don't think that's the case. I think that there is nothing having to do with it in our day and age. I've examined it, and it seems to me that it's pretty much just a cultural thing that's developed. I don't see any hard doctrine on it. It seems to be coming more from a Christian background that is slowly developed and then carried over into Mormon culture as well. So ultimately, this one I just no longer believe. And that created a little bit of uncomfortableness. So when you're dealing with that sense of cognitive dissonance, you really need to stop and question if this is actually something that is attacking your testimony, theology, what you understand to ultimately be true, or if it's something having to do with an assumption that you don't quite realize is there. Like the assumption that this over here actually matters to your testimony of the gospel. Usually, if you really think about it and contemplate it, it's really not tied to the actual gospel and what you ultimately believe. We simply carry a lot of these peripheral beliefs, if you will, and they're attached to a lot of our more fundamental beliefs. So when dealing with cognitive dissonance, just realize it is normal. It's a part of the human experience. If you don't get it, like I said, you're probably not reading or socializing enough like you should. If you do get it, take the time to investigate multiple views. Be okay with that cognitive discomfort. Don't make it into a bad thing. It's not. Be okay with it. Read it, study it, pray about it if you're a believer, and look at different views. Be okay with being wrong. And then on the flip side, if you do really believe in something and you determine this is really tied to my testimony, I'm not sure how to get over this, I would admonish to just simply remember, if this is that important to you, that ultimately there is a difference between history and the past. So the past is ultimately what happened. We weren't there, okay? But history is an interpretation with the available evidence that we have, whether that's archaeology, the written word, what other forms we can find to give evidence. Okay, so while important to try and learn what was originally happening or what an original author meant, it still is based on interpretation and with the evidence that is available. Okay, so all right, so I actually have this with even the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's obviously not good evidence that Christ was literally resurrected. Some witness accounts in a 2,000-year-old text, or I'm just throwing that number, some of the texts aren't quite that old, is just not good evidence, especially when you start considering how people viewed the spiritual realm during that time. There's a lot to it that I'm not going to talk about here. But ultimately, regardless of evidence, I have chosen to believe in the resurrection of Christ. It's fundamental to who I am and my system of belief, and it's not a belief that I'm willing to let go of. So that might happen. You might encounter that, where you just simply have to stop and realize that the evidence is not going to get everything that there is. But I do think that we need to be more open as people that believe in the gospel. We need to be more open to actually looking at what people have to say that study these things for years and years. I feel like we dismiss it much too quickly. And these people are highly trained in trying to understand what was originally written. They have a lot of good information to give, but at times it is going to create cognitive dissonance. So if you come across that, I hope this helps to try and navigate that. Thank you for listening.